Good evening and welcome back. Pull your chair a little closer if you have one, and if you don't, the floor will do just fine. I've never minded people who sit on floors. Pour yourself something warm or something cold, whatever the night calls for. And before we begin, I'd love to know where you are listening from tonight. Drop it in the comments or whisper it to whoever's sitting next to you. A kitchen in Budapest, a train somewhere between cities, a bedroom that smells faintly of someone who used to live there. These details matter to me, even when I can't hear them. Tonight, we're going beneath the surface. Not metaphorically, though it will become metaphorical soon enough, the way these things always do. Tonight, we go down into the water and into the earth and into the oldest, angriest, most misunderstood corner of the ancient Greek cosmos. Tonight, we talk about Poseidon, not the sanitized version, not the decorative god you pass in museum hallways with his trident and his pleasant marble expression, as if he spent his immortality posing for sculptors who needed something for the civic center. That version is missing something. That version is the ocean at noon on a summer day. Beautiful, fine, utterly domesticated. The real Poseidon is the ocean at 3 in the morning when you can't see the bottom and you're not sure the bottom exists. Let me tell you how it started. Before there were gods, before there was anything that could be called a world, there was no darkness, because darkness requires the idea of light to be itself. There was only a kind of absolute, undifferentiated everything and nothing that the Greeks would later call chaos, though the word meant something closer to a vast opening, a gaping void, a mouth that has not yet decided what it will swallow. Into this chaos, Gaia emerged. Earth, the first solid thing, the first idea of ground, of weight, of standing. She did not arrive from anywhere. She simply became the way a thought becomes when it has been almost thought for long enough that thinking it is no longer a choice. And then, from herself, she made Uranos, sky. He rose above her and arched himself over her, and she looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and between looking and being looked at, the first relationship in the universe was invented. This is the detail that matters. She made him from herself. He was not separate. He was a portion of her turned outward, given distance. The Greeks understood this, even if they didn't always say it clearly, that the sky is nothing but the earth's own longing to see itself from far enough away to know what it looks like. Uranos was beautiful and terrible, the way everything is beautiful and terrible when it is the only one of its kind. He covered Gaia completely, the way the sky covers the earth completely. And in this covering and being covered, they generated offspring so enormous, so chaotic, and so violent that Uranos grew afraid. The Titans came first, 12 of them, immense and old and burning with purpose they did not yet have names for. Then the Cyclopes, single-eyed, electric, already in love with fire and with the deep hot places where metal becomes something other than metal. Then the Hecatonchires, 3 creatures of 100 hands each, 300 hands per body, vast and terrible as natural disasters given a face. Uranos looked at these children and saw in them the undoing of what he was. He saw what it looks like when what you've made surpasses you, and he did what frightened fathers have done ever since the first frightened father existed. He pushed them back down. He stuffed them into the earth into Gaia herself, back into her depths, and held them there. Every time she labored and delivered, he forced the children back, and she felt them turning inside her like stones, and she ached in a way that had no name yet, because pain was still being invented and hadn't finished being invented and wouldn't be finished being invented for a very long time. Gaia was patient in the way that tectonic plates are patient. She did not rage, she calculated. From the grey flint to the deep earth, she fashioned a sickle. Some accounts say adamant, the indestructible metal, as if the weapon had to be as hard as the act. And she brought it to her children and asked which of them would help her. The 100-handed ones said nothing. The Cyclopes said nothing. The Titans shifted and looked at the ceiling, at the floor, at each other, and said nothing, because Uranos' fear had become their fear, and they were afraid of being afraid. Only Kronos stepped forward. He was the youngest of the Titans, and already there is something in that detail that wants to mean something. The youngest, the boldest, the hungriest. He took the sickle. He waited in the shadows of the earth, in the place where earth and sky nearly touch. And when Uranos came down to Gaia in the night, Kronos reached out from the darkness and did what he had promised to do. And the sky rang with a sound that had never been made before and would never be made again. And all the years afterward would carry the echo of it in the back of their throats without knowing where it came from. Uranos' severed parts fell into the sea, and where they touched the water, something rose from the foam. But that is a story that belongs to another night, another god, another ocean. Tonight, we stay underwater. Kronos ruled. Of course he ruled. He had earned it with a grey flint sickle, and with the courage that is very hard to distinguish from simple ruthlessness when you are young enough and angry enough. He freed his siblings from the earth, and they moved across the world like weather. And for a time, something very much like an age of glory appeared to be happening. The Greeks would call it the Age of Kronos, and they would describe it with that specific melancholy that attaches itself to golden ages, as if golden ages can only be recognized from a distance, and recognition and loss are always the same gesture. But Uranos had spoken in his pain, in the blood-soaked moment of his unmanning, and what he had said was this, that Kronos would be overthrown by his own child, that what he had done to his father, a child of his would do to him. This is the first prophecy in the world, technically speaking, though some say it was less a prophecy than a curse, and some say those two things are the same. Kronos heard it. He couldn't unhear it. He married his sister Rhea, who was the earth in a different mode, not Gaia's deep bedrock patience, but something greener, something seasonal, something that moved. And when she gave birth to their first child, Kronos swallowed it. Not metaphorically. He opened his mouth and he swallowed the infant whole, the way the earth swallows things, because he had learned from his father the lesson of elimination. But he had learned it wrong. His father had pushed children back into the mother. Kronos put them into himself, as if he were the mother and the earth both, as if he could be the place where things are kept and also the force that keeps them. He swallowed Hestia. He swallowed Demeter. He swallowed Hera. He swallowed Hades. He swallowed Poseidon. Think about that last one for a moment. The the god who would shake the world, who would split the earth with his trident, who would raise storms that swallowed entire fleets. He spent his earliest existence inside his father's stomach, in the dark, in the silent churning dark, with his brothers and sisters around him, all of them not quite dead, not yet born, held in a kind of suspension that has no word in English and probably no word in Greek either. What did it do to him, that darkness? What did the sound of his father's heartbeat teach him? What do you learn about power when the first enclosed space you ever know is the belly of the thing that fears you? Rhea endured this the way mothers endure terrible things, by keeping count and waiting. When she was pregnant with her sixth child, she went to Gaia and Uranos, and they told her what to do. She traveled to Crete, to a cave on the mountain Ida, and there she gave birth to Zeus. And instead of taking him to Kronos, she wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to her husband and watched him swallow it without looking, the way you swallow something you can't afford to examine. Zeus was hidden. He was raised by nymphs, or by the goat Amalthea, or by a group of warriors called the Curetes, who made such noise with their shields and their dancing that the infant's cries could never be heard. The stories vary here, and I want to honor the variance rather than paper over it, because the variance is itself telling. The world couldn't agree on who raised the god of sky and order, only that he was raised in hiding, in secret, in the kind of fierce protective obscurity that creates either a saint or a tyrant, or, in the case of gods, something that is both at once. He grew, he came back, he gave Kronos an emetic, some say prepared by Metis, the Oceanid, the goddess of cunning, which is the kind of detail that makes you stop and think about what it means that the god of wisdom had to trick the god of time into vomiting. And Kronos vomited. He vomited the stone first, and then he vomited the gods in reverse order of swallowing, because that is what stomachs do. Poseidon came out last, or second to last, or in the middle. Here too the accounts differ. But came out he did, emerging from his father's body into the light of a world he had never seen with his own eyes. And if he was disoriented, if he was raw, if he came out already carrying something difficult in his chest, something that would never entirely leave him, something that felt like being enclosed even in open water, well, that seems reasonable. The war that followed lasted 10 years. The Titans on one side, Zeus and his siblings on the other. The Titanomachy. The gods fought from Olympus, or used Olympus as their rallying point, and the Titans fought from Mount Othrys, and the world between them was broken and remade and broken again, in the way that the earth sometimes shows you. It can be broken and remade when there are forces working inside it that have no concern for what lives on the surface. Here is the part that isn't always told, or isn't told with the emphasis it deserves. The war was unwinnable for the Olympians until Poseidon and his siblings went down into Tartarus and released the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, the prisoners, the ones Uranos had stuffed into the earth and Kronos had re-imprisoned after liberating them, because Kronos had the same problem his father had, which is the problem that power always has. It can only reproduce itself by consuming what it fears. The Cyclopes gave gifts. To Zeus, lightning. To Hades, a helmet of darkness that made him invisible. To Poseidon, a trident. Consider the trident for a moment, not as a symbol, not yet as a weapon, but as an object with 3 tines, 3 points, 3 lines of force. There is a reason the 3-pronged shape became associated with the sea and not with, say, agriculture or love or war. The sea is never one thing. The sea is surface and depth, and the unknown third thing below the depth that you can't see even when you've gone as far down as anything can go. The sea is wave and current and tide. The sea is what it does to you and what it is without you and what it keeps. Threeness is built into the ocean in a way that eludes two-ness and even fourness. Poseidon's weapon was designed for his element before he knew what his element was. The Hecaton Kyres took up rocks, Olympus's mountains, some say whole mountainsides, and threw them at the Titans in such quantities that the landscape of the world changed as a side effect of the battle. When the Titans finally fell, when Kronos was defeated and cast down, the earth was different from what it had been before the war. Coastlines had moved, mountains had been made and unmade. The record of the fighting was written into the geology of the world itself, which is something that happens with wars of a certain magnitude, divine or otherwise. After the war, the division, 3 brothers, 3 realms, and here, in this moment of apportionment, you can see the thing that the entire structure of Greek divine hierarchy is really about, which is not order exactly, but the negotiation of order, the argument about who gets what, the conversation that is always also a threat and always also a performance of reasonableness. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades stood together and they drew lots, or they negotiated, or Zeus simply claimed the sky because he had led the war and the others were too tired to argue. The stories give you different versions of this moment, and I think that's because the Greeks understood that how power gets divided is never as clean as any one version of it suggests. Power doesn't get divided. It gets struggled over and then frozen into the form the struggle left it in. And then the frozen form gets called the natural order. Zeus took the sky, the upper air, the lightning, the law-giving heights from which everything can be surveyed and nothing is too close. Zeus is the god of overseers, of those who manage from above. Hades took the underworld, the beneath, the final destination, the place where all things go when they stop being what they were. Hades is not evil in the Greek conception. He's simply final, and finality gets confused with evil by anyone who isn't ready for it, which is everyone. Poseidon took the sea, the earth between sky and underworld, the surface of the world and the depths below that surface, and also, and this is crucial, the earth itself, the earthquakes, the springs, the rivers, some say, or at least their sources. He did not take the water. He took the idea of force moving through the world, whether that force moves through ocean or through ground. He was Earthshaker long before he was Lord of the Sea. The sea is what you see. The shaking is what you feel. The Olympians built their court on high. They held their councils and arranged the lesser divinities into the structures that would govern the world going forward. Poseidon built a palace beneath the waves at the bottom of the sea. Some accounts place it near the coast of Euboea, others near the Aegean's deepest point. with its own architecture of gold and silver and sea glass, with its own horses that moved through water the way horses move through air, with its own kind of grandeur that was not the grandeur of the sky, but something colder and older and wetter. He was present at Olympus when the business of governing the cosmos required his presence. He voted on things. He argued. He lost arguments to Zeus and won arguments against other gods, and occasionally the resentment of his position, the second best realm, the less visible sovereignty, the power that was always being told it was equal even when the hierarchy of the narrative said otherwise. That resentment surfaced, sometimes like a current, sometimes like a tidal wave. There is a quarrel, and it is the quarrel that defines him in his relationship with the mortal world. Athena and Poseidon both wanted to be the patron of the great city on the rock in Attica, the city that would become the most important city in the ancient Greek world. They were asked to make their cases in gifts. Poseidon struck the rock of the Acropolis with his trident, and where the trident struck, a spring appeared. Salt water, some say, because Poseidon's water was always salt water, always tasted of the ocean even underground. Others say a horse rose from where the trident struck, because Poseidon was also the maker of horses, which is another story for another night, but not an unrelated one. Because horses and the sea move the same way, in waves, in rolling power. Athena pressed her palm to the earth, and an olive tree grew. The olive tree that gives oil and wood and food and shade, and has been central to Mediterranean civilization for as long as there has been Mediterranean civilization. The gods adjudicated. All the city's people did. Or Cecrops, the half-man, half-serpent king of the city, did. The olive tree won. The city was named Athens. And Poseidon, furious, flooded the plain of Attica and turned the sea against the coast and made it clear, without saying anything so direct as a declaration, that losing did not mean the same thing to him that it meant to people who could afford to lose. He never let Athens forget it, not for the entire span of Greek myth and history. There is the shadow of Poseidon under almost every Athenian disaster at sea. A fleet caught in a storm, a harbour silted over, a ship breaking apart in weather that seemed personal somehow. And perhaps it was. Perhaps the god of the sea held a grudge the way the sea holds everything, at depth, in the cold, in the place where light doesn't reach. This is the opening of something, the first thread of who he would become in his dealings with the human world. Let me follow it a little further, down into the water. Poseidon had children, an enormous number of children, by an enormous number of mothers, divine, semi-divine, mortal, nymph, nereid, naiad, and at least once a goddess who may or may not have been willing. And we'll get to that, because it matters, and because the ancient world's understanding of that kind of violation is different from ours in ways that are uncomfortable to sit with, but important not to look away from. He had children who became monsters. He had children who became kings. He had children who became cities. His most famous son, or one of them, is Polyphemus, the Cyclops who would become the hinge of the most famous sea voyage in the ancient world, was born of Poseidon and Theseus, a sea nymph, daughter of Phorcys, who was himself something primordial and difficult to classify. A sea god of the old type, before the Olympians organized things, before the taxonomy was settled, Theseus gave Poseidon a son with one eye, immense and slow and terrible, who lived in a cave on an island and kept sheep and had no knowledge of the Olympian gods or their arrangements or any law that applied to the world outside his cave. The Cyclops is not simply a monster to Poseidon. He is a child. And when Odysseus, the cleverest of the Greeks, the man whose cunning was a divine attribute, the man who outwitted Circe and navigated Scylla and Charybdis and told the gods themselves what they could do with their offers of immortality, when Odysseus blinded Polyphemus and escaped the cave by clinging to the belly of a ram, and when he was far enough out to sea to feel safe, he shouted his name back at the island. He gave Polyphemus his real name. This is the thing that dooms him. Not the blinding, the announcing. Polyphemus prayed to his father, and his prayer was the most specific, most devastating prayer in the ancient canon. Let Odysseus not reach home, or if he must reach home, let him reach it late and alone, having lost all his men, and let him find only trouble waiting. Poseidon heard the prayer and answered it in the way that prayers are answered by gods who have no constraint on their power, completely, over years, with the patience of something that doesn't experience time the way its targets do. The 10 years of the Trojan War and the 10 years of the Odyssey are both, in part, Poseidon's wars. He supported the Greeks at Troy, partially, ambiguously, in the complicated way that gods support things when they don't particularly care who wins, but have grudges against specific participants. He devastated the Greek fleet on its return from Troy, in storms of such systematic violence that almost every hero of the war died or suffered terribly on their way home. And many of the ones who made it home found disaster waiting there instead of welcome. He wasn't finished. He is never quite finished. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. There are heroes to account for. There are lives that intersected with Poseidon's power in ways that illuminate him more clearly than the theology does. Let me go back. Let me go back to the children. I need to pause here. The list of Poseidon's offspring is, in the original sources, genuinely staggering, not just in number, but in variety, as if whoever compiled the genealogies was making a philosophical point about the sea's indiscriminate creative power. I'm going to choose carefully. Some I will dwell on, others I'll move past, not because they're unimportant, but because the story has a center of gravity and I need to stay close enough to it to feel the pull. Theseus. There is no story of Poseidon's children that is more complicated, more politically loaded, more strange in its structure than the story of Theseus. Theseus was born of, and here the myth splits in the way myths split when they're carrying contradictory truths. Either Aegeus, the king of Athens, a mortal man, old and anxious and childless until he wasn't, or Poseidon, the god of the sea, who lay with Theseus's mother Aethra on a night that the accounts describe with specific ambiguity. Both of them, some say, both the king and the god, on the same night, which is either an impossible thing or a mythological way of saying that the child was more than any single origin could account for. Aethra was the daughter of Pittheus, the king of Troezen, a city on the Saronic Gulf. Aegeus came to Troezen in despair, having visited the oracle at Delphi and received one of those oracular answers that is so oblique as to be either supremely wise or completely useless. He was told not to loosen the foot of his wineskin before he returned to Athens. This meant nothing to him. He went to Pythias, who understood it or claimed to, and who got Aegeus drunk and put Aethra in his bed. The night after, Aethra went down to the sea, and some say she waded in, and some say Poseidon appeared to her, and some say she lay with the god on a rock that became sacred afterward. The child born from whatever that night was is Theseus. He grew up in Troezen, raised by his mother and his grandfather, knowing that he had a father, but not knowing who or where that father was. When he was old enough, and old enough here means strong enough, because the test was physical, Aethra took him to a great stone and told him to lift it. Underneath, a sword and sandals, left by Aegeus, a claim and a direction buried under rock. The sword meant legitimacy. The sandals meant wear them and come find me. The stone meant when you are strong enough. Theseus lifted the stone. He could have sailed to Athens directly, quickly, safely. He chose instead to walk the coastal road that was known to be one of the most dangerous roads in the ancient world. Not because bandits lived on it, though they did, but because the bandits on this road were of a particular type that made the road something approaching a catalogue of human monstrousness. He walked it anyway. Here the narrative slows down because the road demands it, and because each encounter on the road tells you something about Theseus that abstract description never could. Periphetes, who carried a bronze club and used it on travelers. Sinis, who tied travelers between two bent pine trees and let them go, so the trees would tear the traveler apart. His epithet was Pitiocamptes, the pine bender. Siron, who kicked travelers off a cliff into the sea below, where a giant turtle waited to eat them. Kerchion, who challenged travelers to wrestling matches and killed those who lost, which was everyone, until Theseus, who won. Procrustes, the stretcher, who had a bed that he insisted guests fit perfectly. For those who were too short, he stretched them. For those who were too long, he cut off what extended beyond the frame. In every case, Theseus killed the bandit with their own method. He beat Periphetes with the club. He bent Sinis between the pine trees. He kicked Siron off the cliff. He wrestled Terkion. He trimmed Procrustes to fit the bed. This is the mechanism of heroic justice in the Greek world. The punishment fits the crime because the punishment is the crime turned around. There's something very satisfying about it, and something very cold. Theseus was not merciful. He was proportional, which is a different thing, and a god's son, which means he understood proportion in the way that gods understand it. Absolutely, without exception, without the softening that comes from being mortal and therefore capable of imagining yourself in the other person's place. He arrived in Athens. His father almost killed him, thinking him a foreign assassin. Then Aegeus recognized the sword and the sandals, and the joy of that recognition is one of the warmer moments in a mythology that does not deal in warm moments cheaply. Theseus was acknowledged. He was made heir. And then the ships came from Crete. Every 9 years, some say 7, some say 9, and the discrepancy is less important than the regularity, the inescapable cyclical nature of it. Athens sent tribute to King Minos of Crete. 14 young Athenians, 7 boys and 7 girls, sent into the labyrinth at Knossos to be devoured by the Minotaur. This was the cost of losing a war Athens had fought and lost when Minos' son Androgeos had been killed in Athens, murdered or died in a contest that went wrong. And Minos had sailed against Athens in grief and rage, and Athens had been forced to submit. The tribute was loss made regular. It was grief scheduled. It was a city feeding its children to another city's monster on a calendar. Theseus was going. He said so before the ships had even been selected for him, or he volunteered, or he replaced one of the chosen 14. The accounts vary here too, but the essential fact is that he decided the cycle would end, and he would be the one to end it. Aegeus asked him, "Come back, flying white sails, if you live. If you die, the captain will fly black sails, and I'll see them from the shore before the ship reaches harbor." You know the ending. You already know the ending, because the ending is where the myth got its name, and the name of the ending has been attached to Theseus' father for thousands of years. The Aegean Sea, the sea that is named for a father's grief, for the black sails that Theseus forgot to change. For the moment, Aegeus saw his son's ship returning with death sails and knew, incorrectly, but knew completely, that his child was gone and stepped off the cliff, or simply fell into the sea that bears his name. But first, the labyrinth. Ariadne, daughter of Minos and Pasiphae, saw Theseus and loved him, the way the daughters of kings in Greek myth love heroes, which is absolutely and immediately, and with no apparent concern for what they are giving up. She went to Daedalus, the craftsman who had built the labyrinth, and he told her what to give: a ball of thread, one end tied to the entrance. Ariadne gave Theseus the thread and the means to follow it back. He went in. He found the Minotaur, the monster that was the son of Pasiphae, and a bull that Poseidon had sent. And we should pause here and note that Poseidon is the source of the original wrong, the animal whose beauty drove Minos' wife mad, the god whose gift became the thing that had been devouring Athenian children for years. He found the Minotaur and he killed it. He followed the thread back out. He took Ariadne. He left Crete. And then, on the island of Naxos, he left Ariadne, asleep on the shore, and then simply gone, sailing before she woke. And the reasons given are various. He loved another. He was commanded by a god. He forgot her. He lost his nerve about what bringing her home would mean. But whatever the reason, the image is the same. A woman waking on a shore to find the sails of the man she saved disappearing over the horizon. The black sails, the forgotten exchange, the father on the cliff. Poseidon's thread runs through all of it, visible or not. The god who gave the bull that made the monster that demanded the tribute that brought Theseus to Crete. The god whose sea swallowed Aegis, whose waves closed over the old king's body and kept him. Poseidon doesn't appear in the Theseus story as a character very much, but he is present in his architecture the way water is present in stone that has been wet for long enough. You can feel it even when you can't see it. The hero who killed the Minotaur was the son of the sea god. The sea took his father. The monument of that loss is named for the water that received it. There is a closed loop in this that feels less like narrative convenience than like something structural, something that happens when the rules of an ancient cosmos are followed all the way to the end. Anyway, there are other children There is Orion, the great hunter, who was Poseidon's son, or in some accounts, Gaia's son, or in some accounts, a man who was given the ability to walk on water because of his divine parentage, which is its own strange thing to think about. The sea god's son, walking on top of the sea, held up by his blood. Orion, who hunted everything that could be hunted, and then was placed in the stars either by Zeus or by Artemis, in grief or in punishment, and who chases the Pleiades across the winter sky, because some things you pursue forever, even after you're dead, even after your light. There is Polyphemus, whom we have already met. There is Antaeus, the giant of Libya, son of Poseidon and Gaia, who could not be defeated as long as he touched the earth. Heracles finally killed him by lifting him off the ground and holding him there until the strength drained out of him, which is the kind of specific solution to a specific problem that shows up in these stories when someone has thought very carefully about what a thing is and what it needs to survive. Antaeus needed contact with his mother, the earth. Remove contact, remove the power. Simple and terrible. There is Chrysa, born from the blood of Medusa when Perseus cut off her head, which is not the sort of origin anyone plans for, and which makes Chrysa one of the stranger members of an already strange family. A man who rose out of a beheading, who married an Oceanid and fathered Geryon, the three-bodied giant who was slain by Heracles. The bloodlines of the divine are not clean. They tangle back on themselves the way rivers tangle when they're close to the sea, getting wider and slower and harder to follow. I want to stop here and say something about Polyphemus. I keep coming back to him, more than the narrative strictly requires, and I'm not entirely sure why. There's something in the relationship between Poseidon and the Cyclops that seems important in a way that isn't about plot. The god of the vast sea had a son who lived in a cave and kept sheep and had never seen another culture, had no idea that there was a world of men and ships and clever, terrible people out there who might one day sail into his bay. Poseidon, who was everywhere, in the Aegean and the Atlantic and the waters that the ancient world thought surrounded everything, had a child who had never been anywhere. The god of movement had a child who never moved. I find that interesting. I might be wrong about its importance. I'm leaving it in anyway. Let me come to Amphitrite. She was a Nereid, one of the 50 daughters of Nisyros, the old man of the sea god who came before Poseidon and survived into the Olympian era as a kind of elderly dignitary, respected but no longer powerful. Amphitrite was calm and deep and beautiful in the way that deep water is beautiful, which is not a soft beauty but an absolute one. She was his queen, his wife, his partner in the governance of the sea realm. He wanted her. She did not want him initially. She fled. She went and hid among the other Nereids, or she went to the Atlas Mountains at the edge of the world, and Poseidon sent his messengers after her. One of them, a dolphin, found her and spoke for Poseidon with such eloquence or such persistence that she agreed, and in gratitude, Poseidon placed the dolphin in the stars. That is the official version, the version in which she is courted and persuaded. There are hints of other versions, darker ones, and I am not going to pretend those hints don't exist, but I also don't want to overstate them. The sea does not ask permission. That is the nature of the sea. Poseidon's relationships with the mortal and semi-divine beings who gave him children are complicated in exactly the way that power relationships are always complicated by the fact that one party has power and the other doesn't. And in the ancient world, that fact didn't produce the moral discomfort it produces now, at least not officially, at least not in the recorded text. The discomfort is there though. You can feel it under the stories the way you feel the seabed under the water. Amphitrite became queen of the sea. She had her own domain within the domain. She had her own retinue of sea creatures, her own relationship with the Nereids, her own interventions in the stories that washed up from the human world. She is not as much a part of the mythological record as Hera or Athena or Demeter. She is quieter, more withdrawn, more oceanic in her very self, which means she is everywhere in the background, but rarely at the center. The way the sea is always visible in Greek art, but rarely the subject of it. She was jealous when Poseidon's attention went elsewhere. She transformed Scylla, once a beautiful nymph, loved or nearly loved by the god of the sea, into the six-headed monster of the strait. She did this the way powerful wives in mythology do terrible things, completely, without visible regret, and then went on living in the palace under the waves as if nothing had changed, and perhaps nothing had changed. Perhaps Scylla had always been a monster, and the beautiful nymph was the version that a world which loved beautiful things had placed on top of her. Perhaps transformation in these stories is less about changing something and more about revealing it. I don't know. I'm not sure anyone does. These are the questions the myths leave you with. Let me collect the thread. The war between the Titans and the Olympians had ended. The world was divided. Poseidon had his realm, had his palace, had his trident, had his queen. The order of things was established, and what that order required was, well, maintenance, administration, the management of the vast and unruly thing that the Greek cosmos was. Poseidon's part of that management was the sea and the earth, the surface that most mortals had to cross to get anywhere, and the ground beneath their feet that could, at any moment, stop being reliable. He built his roads, not roads in the human sense, not paths of stone, but routes through the water, currents that guided sailors and sank them, channels that connected ports and channels that hid reefs. He trained his horses, the white foam chargers that pulled his chariot across the surface of the sea, and whose hooves were what the Greeks heard in the wave crash on the shore. He made islands, threw rocks into the sea, or raised the sea floor, or did both simultaneously, because the distinction between sea and earth was always under his jurisdiction, and he could revise it when he needed to. He made Delos, some say, for the birth of Apollo and Artemis. He made Thera, the island of Santorini, from a clod of earth thrown by the Argonauts. Though this account is complicated, and possibly not Poseidon's doing specifically, and possibly the story of a volcano that the Greeks needed to give a divine author, the world was full of things that needed authors. The Great War, the one that came after the Titanomachy, and was perhaps even older in its roots, the war that the ancient world would call the war between the Olympians and the giants, the Gigantomachy, also demanded Poseidon's participation. The giants had been born from the blood of Uranos, like the Furies and the ash tree nymphs, and they rose against Olympus, and the war was terrible. and long. An oracle had said the giants could only be defeated if a mortal fought alongside the gods. Heracles was chosen. Heracles was always chosen when something needed to be killed that couldn't be killed by lesser means. And so the giants fell, one by one, to the combined effort of divine power and mortal cunning, and the specific, targeted, always right arrows of Heracles. Poseidon's contribution to this war, the contribution that has stayed in the record most visibly, is polyboats. The giant polyboats was pursued across the sea by Poseidon with the Trident through waves that the god made and unmade as he moved. And when Polybotes reached the island of Kos, or fled toward it, Poseidon tore off a piece of the island and threw it at the giant, and it landed on him and became a new island, and the island was called Nisyros. The ancient world could walk to Nisyros and stand on it and know that they were standing on a piece of rock that had been used as a weapon in the greatest war the world had seen after the Titanomachy. That is a particular kind of history. The landscape is the archive. The island is the event. The Trojan War sits in the middle of the mythological chronology like a knot in the middle of a rope. Everything before it leads to it. Everything after it is shaped by it. And if you pull either end, the knot gets tighter, which means the war is not an event so much as a structure, a way of organizing time. Poseidon's relationship to the Trojan War is that of someone who has reasons to be on both sides and ends up being on one side more than the other, for reasons that are personal rather than strategic. He hated Troy. He hated Troy because Troy had wronged him. Here is the story. Poseidon and Apollo were punished by Zeus for an act of insubordination or a conspiracy depending on the account. And their punishment was to serve a mortal king for a year. They were sent to serve Laomedon, the king of Troy, who was the father of Priam, who was the father of Hector and Paris. Poseidon and Apollo built the walls of Troy, the walls that would become famous for being impenetrable, the walls that, as any reader of the Iliad knows, were not breached by force but by cunning, because they could not be breached by force. Poseidon built those walls with his own power, and Laomedon refused to pay them. He refused to pay the gods who had built him the greatest walls in the ancient world. He said the payment was too much, or he said he had never promised what they claimed he had promised, or he simply said no and threatened to sell them into slavery and cut off their ears, which in the Greek heroic world is the kind of insult that gets recorded and does not get forgotten. Apollo sent a plague. Poseidon sent a sea monster. The monster required sacrifice, a young woman, the daughter of a king, offered at the shore. Heracles happened to arrive, killed the monster, and then Laomedon refused to pay Heracles either. There is a pattern here. Laomedon was a man who did not pay his debts to divine beings, and who suffered catastrophically for it, not immediately, not in clean linear consequence, but over the arc of his dynasty and his city, until the debt was so large that the entire civilization had to be destroyed to discharge it. When the Trojan War came, Poseidon was on the Greek side. He was not on the Greek side because he liked the Greeks particularly. He was on the Greek side because Laomedon's grandson Hector was defending the walls that Poseidon had built and for which Poseidon had not been paid. And this was intolerable. The walls should not protect the sons of the man who cheated their builder. The walls should be the mechanism of Troy's punishment. not its protection. Zeus complicated matters, as Zeus always complicated matters, by sometimes supporting the Trojans and sometimes forbidding either side from receiving divine help, and sometimes simply leaving for a divine interlude at a feast with the Ethiopians, because Zeus was a god with many demands on his attention and could not always be focused on the war. Poseidon worked around the restrictions. He appeared to the Greeks in the form of Calchas the seer. He breathed strength into men who were failing. He swept across the battlefield in his chariot, the sea surging around him, even inland, away from the shore, because Poseidon carries his element with him the way fire carries its heat. You don't see it always, but you feel the temperature change when it arrives. He pulled Aeneas from the battle at one point. Aeneas, the Trojan hero, the son of Aphrodite, destined, Poseidon knew, because the fate of Aeneas was one of those fates written large enough that even a god who wasn't the fate god could read it, to carry Troy's legacy to a new land. Poseidon pulled him out of danger, not because he liked Aeneas, and not because he was merciful toward Trojans. He wasn't, but because Aeneas carried something beyond the war. The loss of Aeneas would have been the loss of Troy's continuation, and even in hating Troy, Poseidon recognized that a civilization's continuation is a different thing from its persistence, and the continuation might happen without the city. This is the god as something more than a grudge holder. For a moment, the war ended. Troy burned. The Greeks took their ships and went home. Poseidon's next act was to kill them. Not all of them, but enough. He was an Olympian at war with the Greeks, or had been, or was now. The transition is hard to track, because divine allegiances in the aftermath of Troy are not clean. And the Ajax, who was not the large Ajax, the Ajax who was also a hero but a lesser one, that Ajax assaulted Cassandra in Athena's temple during the sack of Troy. And Athena was furious, and she went to Poseidon, who is usually not her ally. Remember the contest, remember the olive tree, remember the salt spring rejected, and she asked for storms. He gave them to her. The ships broke, the men drowned. Ajax himself was killed, not in the storm, but after it, on a rock, where he clung and boasted that he had survived in spite of the gods, which is the specific kind of boasting that the Greek world called hubris, and which the gods found reliably intolerable. Poseidon split the rock with his trident. Ajax fell into the sea. Then Odysseus, the 10 years, the storms, the ships destroyed, the crews drowned, the god of the sea between Odysseus and Ithaca, and not metaphorically, between them, in the sea he had to cross, in the substance through which any journey home had to be made. Poseidon wasn't there all the time. He had other business. He went to the Ethiopians for a feast, and in his absence, Athena arranged things for Odysseus, and Hermes was sent to Calypso, and the raft was built. But when Poseidon came back, he saw the raft on the sea, his element, and the rage was immediate and total. He raised a storm with his hands, with a word, with the weight of his attention falling on the water, and the water understanding what he required. The raft broke. Odysseus was in the water, without anything between him and the depth that Poseidon owned completely. A sea nymph saved him, Leucothea, once the mortal woman Ino, transformed, by giving him her veil to tie around his chest, which kept him afloat through the rest of the storm. He reached Phaeacia. He got home. Poseidon accepted this, bitterly perhaps, or with the recognition that a sea god can do everything except override what is fated, and Odysseus was fated to reach home, however late, however alone, however barely. You cannot drown a man whose return is written. You can only delay it and make it hurt, and make him pay the specific price of a son's eye in suffering and years and grief, and then you let the water settle and you wait for the next one. There is always a next one. Here is the part I find difficult to put into language, and I'm going to try anyway, even though I know the attempt will be imprecise. There is something in Poseidon's position in the Greek cosmos that makes him simultaneously the most powerful and the most frustrated of the Olympians. And the combination produces something in the stories that I want to call loneliness, but which is probably not quite the right word. He is everywhere the Greeks went, because the Greeks went by sea, because their civilization was a maritime one, because every significant journey required crossing his element. He was more constantly present in their daily lives than Zeus, whose lightning was rare and dramatic, or Apollo, whose sun was predictable and abstract, or any of the gods whose domain was something you could ignore for stretches. You couldn't ignore the sea. Every fisherman, every merchant, every soldier being transported, every colonist sailing to a new shore. All of them were in Poseidon's presence for the duration. And yet, the mythology doesn't treat him as central. He's in the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Theogony and the works of Pindar and Aeschylus, and he keeps showing up, but he's almost always reactive. Something is happening, and Poseidon responds to it. He is rarely the initiating force. He is rarely the one who sets the story in motion. He arrives after someone has done something, or failed to pay someone, or prayed to him in desperation, and then he does what the sea does. He amplifies, he extends, he continues what was started. He is the element through which things happen, rather than the thing that makes them happen. There is a philosophical tradition in thinking about Poseidon that wants to locate him in this position deliberately, as the unconscious force, as the element that carries rather than directs, as the medium through which human fate moves. I'm not sure I fully agree, because the grudge against Odysseus, the rivalry with Athena, the punishment of Troy, the transformation of Scylla, that was Amphitrite technically, but the waters of it were his. These feel like agency, feel like a god who wants things and takes actions toward them. He is not simply a medium. He is a medium with opinions, which is a terrifying thing to be, and which might explain the earthquakes. The earth shakes when Poseidon is angry, in the Greek understanding. Not the earth in some metaphorical sense. The ground itself, the soil and stone under cities and temples and the houses of sleeping families. This shakes when the god of the sea decides to express his displeasure. The connection between sea and earth seems, from a modern standpoint, like an accident of mythology, like the sort of thing that happens when a pre-scientific civilization is trying to explain both large bodies of water and seismic activity, and it makes sense that the same force underlies both. But I don't think it's accidental, and I don't think the Greeks thought it was accidental. I think the Greeks understood, not as scientists understand things, but in the oblique way that mythological thinking understands things, which is through story and metaphor and the careful attention to what goes together, that the sea and the earth are both expressions of the same force, the force that is below all human structures and can override all human structures, the force that your buildings sit on and your ships float on, and which, at any moment, could decide to behave differently, to choose a different mode, to break the agreement it never actually made. Poseidon is the god of the ground under your feet. The sea is just where he's most visible. This is why the ancients prayed to him before voyages, yes, but also before building, also before they put something permanent into the earth, also before they planted things in soil that sat above water tables that could change. The prayer to Poseidon was the prayer you made when you were about to commit yourself to something that the ground and the sea and the depth below both would need to cooperate with, and you were asking them to cooperate, please, and you were offering them something in return, because exchange is the only language that power understands. Here is a moment that I want to linger on, not because it's narratively central, but because it keeps pulling at me. There was a tradition in certain Greek cities of a figure called the Hippios, the horse god, Poseidon in his aspect, as the maker and tamer of horses. This Poseidon was not the sea god as such, but the god of the horse, as the animal of controlled power, the animal that is enormous and can kill you and has been persuaded not to. The relationship between horse and rider is a particular kind of negotiation that ancient people understood as a kind of daily miracle, that something wild could be made useful, that something dangerous could be made a partner. Poseidon made horses, created them, gave them to the world, the white horses of the sea foam horses, the chariot horses, and also just horses, the ones that plow and carry and race. He is the source of this partnership between human beings and something that is powerful enough to choose to be otherwise. I think this is connected to the sea. I think the horses are the sea in a different form, approachable, rideable, trainable in a way the sea is not, but retaining the same fundamental nature, the same reserves of power that can be called upon and can't be permanently subdued. A horse can be tamed. A horse can also, at any moment, remind you that taming is not the same as transformation. The sea can be navigated. The sea can also, at any moment, remind you that navigation is not the same as mastery. Poseidon's gifts are always structured this way. They give you enough. They never give you everything. What does it mean that a god so powerful is so consistently defined by what he withholds? The wars are over. The gods are settled into their positions. The great monsters have been killed or contained or transformed into other things. Heracles has done his labors and become a god. The age of heroes is ending, the way ages always end in the Greek mythological cosmos, not with a single catastrophic event, but with a fading, a thinning out of the heroic quality of human life, a slow drift away from the time when gods walked among mortals and mortals were large enough to deserve it. The twilight of the Greek mythological world is a peculiar thing. It doesn't end. It doesn't collapse into nothing. It becomes something else slowly over a long time, in a process that is both historical and cosmological, and the gods don't die in it. They withdraw, or they attenuate, or they become the names that other peoples attach to the forces that those peoples have always known were real, even if they didn't always have the names. Poseidon became Neptune. This is a simplification that is also, in its way, a truth. The Romans needed a sea god, had always had one, had their own ancient relationship with the waters around the Italian peninsula, and when they encountered the Greek tradition and its powerful sea god, they recognized something, a family resemblance between the thing they had always called Neptune and the thing the Greeks called Poseidon, and they named them the same. The equation was never perfect. Neptune was gentler in some accounts, or different in emphasis, or attached to slightly different stories. But the association settled, and for most of the Latin and then the European literary tradition, Poseidon and Neptune became the same word said in two different languages. The Trident moved with the name. The symbol survived every translation. There is something that the Trident means: three-pronged power, the forked authority of the sea god, the tool that is also a weapon, that is also an instrument of creation, and that something doesn't depend on which language you're speaking. It passes through languages the way a current passes through water, invisibly, but carrying things, carrying information and force from one place to another. Anyway, the Renaissance rediscovered the classical world and brought Poseidon, Neptune with it. He appeared in fountains across Italy and later all of Europe, stone Neptune in marble basins, presiding over the water of public squares. He appeared in paintings and in epic poetry, and in the cosmological frameworks that tried to reconcile classical learning with Christian theology, a process that was never entirely clean and produced strange hybrids that neither the classical world nor the Christian church would entirely have recognized as their own. And then there is the version of Poseidon that science eventually produced without meaning to. When geologists began to understand the structure of tectonic plates in the 20th century, when it became clear that the ground under our feet was not solid in the way we assumed it was solid, that it was in motion, slow, unimaginably slow motion, but motion, and that when plates pressed against each other or pulled apart from each other, the result was earthquakes and volcanoes and the rising and falling of sea floors. They were describing in a different language something the Greeks had already described. They were saying, the sea and the earth are connected. The same forces that move the ocean floor move the land above it. There is a single system below both. Poseidon, Earthshaker, they called it plate tectonics. This is an anachronism, and I know it's an anachronism. The god is not the science, the myth is not the geology, and the Greeks would have found it strange to be told their stories were predictions, because they weren't predictions, they were understandings, which is a different thing. But there's something in the fact that we live on tectonic plates, that our cities are built on something that moves, that the sea floor is the same substance as the earth floor, and they're moving together in the same dance, that every earthquake and every tsunami is the same god expressing the same restlessness. There's something in that which makes the ancient name feel appropriate, not true in a scientific sense, appropriate, resonant, like a word that turned out to mean more than the person who coined it knew. The fear of the sea that is in the Greek mythological tradition is real fear, earned fear, the specific fear of people who sailed in small wooden ships across a body of water that could kill them in an afternoon. and frequently did. This fear needed a face. The face it got was divine, which is the highest category of power available, and the divine face it got was powerful and unpredictable and holding grudges and responsive to prayer and capable of mercy sometimes when addressed correctly, when the sacrifice was right, when the timing was good. This is what gods are for. Not to comfort you with the idea that the universe is friendly, to give you something to negotiate with, to put a face on the force that is bigger than you are, because a face can be spoken to and spoken about, and eventually, maybe, persuaded, and a force without a face cannot be persuaded, can only be endured. Poseidon gave the sea a face. The face was angry, a lot of the time. The face was capable of the specific cold patience of something that outlasts everything that depends on it. But it was a face, and you could pray to it. His temples were at headlands, at the points where the land ends and the sea begins. Cape Sunion, the southernmost tip of Attica, where the marble columns of the Poseidon temple still stand today, battered, incomplete, old in a way that makes the word ancient seem inadequate. Still visible from the sea, still functioning as the landmark they were built to be, still doing the thing they were designed to do 3,000 years ago, which is to mark the place where the human world and the sea world meet, where you are about to leave the one and enter the other, where a prayer seems not just appropriate, but necessary. The structure of the myth is the structure of the experience. You stand at the edge. Below you and in front of you, the sea, which is Poseidon, which is power beyond your ability to manage, but not beyond your ability to address. Behind you, the land, which is also Poseidon in a way, because he shakes it, because the ground is not as solid as it looks, because the same force that moves the water moves the earth, and the distinction between them is partly our preference for the land's relative stillness. Everywhere, his domain. The prayer you make at the headland is the prayer you make at the moment of transition. The prayer at the edge is the fundamental religious act, more fundamental than the prayer in the middle, because in the middle, you can pretend you're fine. At the edge, you can't pretend anything. At the edge, you know. There is a word the Greeks used for the kind of power that Poseidon represented: kratos, strength, power, might. But a specific kind of might, the might that is raw and physical and prior to law, the might that doesn't need law because it precedes the invention of law, the might that the Olympian order was built on top of, and which the Olympian order can organize but cannot eliminate. Zeus has his law and his lightning, and the lightning is impressive. But beneath the lightning, below the law, below the sky, is the ground, is the sea, is the thing that was already moving before anyone decided what the rules would be. Poseidon is Kratos. He is the thing you have to take into account when you are building your order, because if you don't account for it, it will account for you. He never quite accepted second position. He never stopped having opinions about who owned what stretch of coast. He quarreled with Athena, and with Helios, and with Hera, and with Zeus, and with Minos, and with various mortals who failed to pay him what they owed. He sent his creatures against cities and heroes. He shook the earth when he was angry. He flooded the plains when he lost arguments. And yet the world continued. The ships continued to sail. The coast held its shape more or less from year to year, and the fishermen went out in the morning and came back in the evening mostly, and the harvests from the sea were taken, and the prayers were made, and the balance, precarious, negotiated, never stable, never entirely safe, held. That is his legacy. Not the storms, though the storms are real. Not the grudges, though the grudges lasted decades and destroyed civilizations. His legacy is the negotiation itself. The idea that the raw power under everything is not simply antagonistic, but is capable of being addressed. That if you stand at the edge and speak into the wind with the right words and the right offering and the right amount of genuine respect for what you're standing next to, something might shift. The sea hears you. It doesn't always answer the way you want. It doesn't always answer at all, but it hears. He is still here, technically. Not in the theological sense. I'm not here to make theological claims, but in the sense that matters for the way we store knowledge in narrative. The Earthshaker lives in every story about the sea, in every account of a storm that seemed personal, in every sailor who looked at the horizon and felt the inadequacy of their vessel and their plans, in every city built on the coast that has had to reckon with what the coast gives and takes. He lives in the specific quality of fear that the sea induces, which is not the fear of darkness or of height or of cold. It is the fear of depth, the fear of what is below you and cannot be seen and does not end and has no obligation to support you just because you've been floating on it for a while. He lives in the three-pronged shape that we still reach for when we want to indicate sea, the trident that appears in flags and logos and the hands of Neptune statues in fountain squares across the world, the shape that means here is the ancient claim, the pre-Olympian assertion of dominance over the substance that covers most of the planet. He lives in the earthquakes, which science has explained and which explanation has not, cannot, make less terrifying when you feel them. He lives, most particularly, in the stories, in the inheritance of narrative that passes the Earthshaker forward through time, the way a wave passes forward through water. Not the same water, never the same water, but the same shape, the same force, the same fundamental movement from somewhere deep and old toward the surface where it can be seen and named. The myth is not the god. The story is not the thing. But the story keeps the thing's shape in culture, preserves it the way a mold preserves the shape of what it was made from. And when someone needs that shape again, when someone stands at the headland and feels the inadequacy of their position relative to the sea, they reach for the old name, for the old story, for the face on the force that is otherwise faceless, for the God who shook the world. We'll leave the ships here at anchor in a bay that might be safe. The water is still tonight, which means nothing. The water is always still when you can't see what's moving below the surface. Somewhere under us, the plates are moving. The sea is taking in what the sea takes in, and keeping what the sea keeps, and giving back what it decides to give back, which is not always what was put into it. I hope wherever you're listening from tonight, you're on solid ground. And if you're not, if you're out there on the water, as a few of you always seem to be, then sail carefully and speak the old names when the horizon goes wrong, and know that the God who shook the world is still listening. He's always listening. Good night.